I welcome you all to the LUMS Asian Under 19 2025 final. On proposition we have Make ISL Great Again. I don't need the speakers out loud right now. Should I? Okay. On opposition we have LACAS Gold. Have a fun, great debate. Prop 1.
We think there is an inherent responsibility on the feminist movement to always enshrine women's rights. What this means is that there is always a duty placed on the feminist movement in all capacity in order to protect women's rights across the board. We think you can only do this if you are a part of the political system for a few reasons. Why so? Because we think problems women face can only be solved through this uniquely. This looks like, for example, criminalization of gender-based violence across the board. For example, you criminalizing all sorts of honor killings, etc. Secondly, oftentimes reducing the gender pay gap. Thirdly, guaranteeing reproductive rights for women. And fourthly, oftentimes influencing family and property law reform within society. These are only unique things that you can get access to if you're a part of the political system actively. We think that you cannot do this on their side of the house if you're always devoid of any political reform. You are not part of the political system, you are external to it. Why so? Because we think there are some unique things that you can do, and this is also our model in terms of what the feminist movement is likely to do within this debate when they become a part of the political system and join it at large. Two things here. Firstly, you can campaign on behalf of other politicians. So for example, you can endorse politicians like Jill Stein in the United States of America. You can do this by active endorsements through feminist channels on media, etc., endorsing them at rallies, for example. Secondly, you can set up your own party. So this looks like, for example, AOC within the United States of America setting up her own party and another feminist party and generally at large. I think you would also get a lot of traction for this. We think you can also become part of other political parties by joining them in terms of becoming wings of political parties actively. Secondly, we think oftentimes you can donate to these parties too if you become parts of these parties in terms of their wings. They can then use media and resources for the proliferation of women's rights within these societies, and this is the active model that we present to you in terms of government here. Then, two arguments in my speech. Firstly, in terms of long-term success and change. Secondly, in terms of how being tied into the system is the only way that you can get any necessary traction for the feminist movement currently. Three tiers to the first argument then. Firstly, how is change likely to exist and success guaranteed on our side of the house? We think progressivism is empirically on the rise within these societies where this debate is actively taking place. What this means is that you see the rise of Zoran Mamdani, for example, in the United States of America. You see people like AOC break into the political system. What this means is that these societies are receptive to these feminist issues. You are able to then do this much better when you are a political party. Why so? We think when you campaign as a political party, there are some exclusive benefits that you are able to access. Firstly, we think you can mobilize people to a larger degree than you can if you're not part of the political system. Why so? You can mobilize money, etc. So currently, we think feminists in the United States of America, for example, are not really that charged for the Democrats, etc. But when you give these feminists a feminist platform on the political spectrum to vote for, you are likely to translate the charged energy that they have in society into actual concrete change. This can look like, for example, increased engagement, increased activism by these feminists. Secondly, we think oftentimes the bar is also lowered on our side of the house for these feminists to contribute to the feminist movement, because now they understand all I have to do is show up to the polling booth and vote for my party. So the bar is lower for them. They know there is more access to bringing actual change when you are a political party and you are campaigning as a political party. This is why generally we think your success as a political party, as a part of the political system, is likely to be guaranteed. Secondly, second tier to this argument then, what do you uniquely get as a part of the political system? We think oftentimes it alters the composition of lawmakers. So for example, if you as a feminist party have your own candidates campaigning in elections and then they rise to the legislative assembly, that breaks into the composition of all male lawmakers. It changes the demographics of these legislative assemblies. They can give you access to two main things. Firstly, you can lobby for your own laws with these people because they have an inherent need for you. Secondly, you can oftentimes initiate the lobbies for for your own policies. So you can campaign within assemblies, etc., for quotas for women at large. We think this is an empirical evidence of this already exists, for example, in countries like Rwanda across the board. This means that you are able to get exclusive benefits as a part of the political system that you are not able to access on their side of the house, because you are not able to access internal pressure groups, something that they rob the feminist movement from on their side of the house. Third tier to this argument then, why is this important for the feminist movement in the first place? We think feminist issues have been sidelined for far too long. It has been far too long that the feminist movement has refused to become a political channel. It is high time that we do this to get any form of concrete reform. Secondly, we think electoral gain is long standing. What this means is that once you're voted into power, stay into power for a longer time. So 4-year terms, etc. What this means is that your capacity to make change oftentimes increases. You have access to state machinery, etc. in order to make actual concrete laws. Thirdly, we think you oftentimes translate social energy around feminist issues into concrete policy on our side of the house. They can never co-opt this if their alternative is to be devoid of any political activity as the feminist movement. They are always an external party to the state, never a part of it. Sure.
Do you think feminist politicians are not going to exist even if the feminist movement isn't actively part of the political system?
I think we give them a better platform on our side of the house. If this is a feminist party actively, then their manifesto is stronger, then their cause is stronger, then they're able to come into power much better on our side of the house. When they are surrounded by like-minded politicians, then they are also able to mobilize their forces much better. Join forces on our side of the house is an exclusive benefit that we give you, something that they cannot co-opt. Second argument then, in terms of how you are tied into the system and why this is better. We think the importance in the political system, when you become a part of the political system, oftentimes increases. Two main things: it first influences your actions, and secondly, others' actions related to you. So other politicians, for example. We think the movement on our side of the house gets empowered when you become a part of the political system. Well, how so? We think oftentimes your bargaining power increases. So you are oftentimes able to establish red lines. You are able to tell other politicians, this is something that I will not compromise on. If you need my vote in parliament, you have to do this. Secondly, you can oftentimes not be co-opted by other parties in the same way that the Green Party on their side of the house co-opts a lot of feminist ideas, because now you have your own party. You can do this much better. You can be radical if you want. Thirdly, you can hold these politicians accountable, because if your vote matters to them, then you can pressure them in the same way. Informal pressure on their side of the house, external pressure cannot do this. We think that when the feminist movement comes to mainstream, you give them a criticality of discussions. So the movement does not become a niche interest group now. It is out to the public. It is in public discourse that gives their issues a sense of criticality. This criticality is important for women because it shapes discussions around these issues. It makes their issues actually important and seen as important. We think you give a legitimacy to the feminist movement on our side of the house. You protect the feminist movement better. You protect women better. You protect the world better.
I started with a bit of rebuttals before I move on to my personal case. So Mohsen comes up here and he lists all of these beautiful reasons, like how you can criminalize stuff, etc. Right? But we think this can also be done regardless. So this is happening on our side of the house in the first place. But we also think, like, political parties will still exist on our side of the house because you still have females with a lot of political incentive, etc. So AOC would have existed regardless because these feminists do exist within the status quo as well, right? Then on their argument then of how if progressiveness is on the rise, right? We think political parties have more of an incentive to cater to them within their policies, right? And I will explain more of this in my argument. And then they talk about how you can easily mobilize, campaign, and all these fancy things, right? But they never tell you where you'll get the money for all of that from, right? We think this inherently exists then on a trade-off, right? So this funding, etc., comes at a direct cost of other important things that you have, which will be explained more in my argument then. But we also think that even if you have these parties in the first place, the feminist movement still has to fight against a lot of the big parties, etc., that have been in politics historically, right? Also, they're framing about how the world is very progressive, etc. We think that this works more into our favor. And then the PY Alpha asked Mohsen, right? We think that when you're actively endorsing one feminist over the other, it's just generally really bad because we don't think politicians should get votes just based on the fact that they have a stamp of feminism on them. We think they need to actively work for this voting, which is what happens on our side of the house. But we also think that feminist narrative then is very diluted, right? Because you're trying to cater to other things on their side of the house. But we also think you cannot switch sides once you endorse these people, right? Because if you try to criticize them later on after endorsing them, you will be labeled as a hypocrite, right? People will criticize the feminist movement and not the political party because this is just something that has been done historically, right? But also just this gives misogynists like more of a reason to like hate on you and just spread this hate. Then moving on to my framing. What is the counterfactual? We think on our side of the house what happens is very indirect engagement, right? So the purpose of feminist movement has always been to spread awareness, help women and help women like unlearn these patriarchal behaviors indoctrinated within them, right? So you spread awareness of these political candidates, right? Regardless of gender. So even if they're a man, even if they're female, you're going to spread that awareness, right? And you're going to explain their stance. You're going to simplify this to your voters, and you'll explain their options to them, right? So you leave these people to decide for themselves who they want to vote on, because a lot of people just don't vote on the basis of, oh, this person is feminist, this isn't. There are like a lot of other reasons that go into this, like economic reasons, etc. So we think this voting or just deciding who they want to vote on should be left, right? But we also think that what happens then is there's just like ample of information and you just for these people to choose from, and then they can make an informed vote out of this, right? But we also like criticize the state actively on our side of the house when they do something bad, and this is like you push the state to do better when they do something like this, and you push them to do better for women. But you also appreciate them when you do things, right? And you don't glamorize them in the same capacity that they do on their side of the house. So you do this because like you don't take a hardline stance here, because you realize that you have to like criticize them and you have to like appreciate them when need be. But what happens is we think this feminist policies and these politicians will exist regardless, right? Because in the status quo we see female politicians who've gone through oppression, etc. But so they're still like within politics, etc. Right. So secondly, the incentive for political parties will always exist to cater to these feminist policies, because A, they need to bank on the feminist voter base that they have, but B, because they know the feminist movement will like criticize and appreciate. So they will try to get that like they will try to be appreciated by like doing things that are more in their favor. Then moving on to my LOA number 2. Moving on to my LOA on how it's the purpose of the feminist movement to be apolitical. So historically, we've seen stuff like they've always been very oppressive towards women, right? So we've seen this through their policies, right? And we've seen this in Roe v. Wade being overturned, right? So an active like sexualization and objectification of women, and just like crackdown on women during protests. So when you have to play their game, what happens then is that you need to forego the institutions that have been historically oppressive towards you, right? But secondly, we also think you then invalidate like the sentiments of oppressed women, and you also validate the oppression that they've gone through, and this is legitimized on their side of the house, because the narrative then becomes very diluted, right? So because you have so many things to focus on, then you can't also be like extremely radical, because you still need to appease to a lot of politicians, etc. So we think just the narrative at large is diluted. Moving on to my LOA then on how this like fragments how endorsing fragments the feminist movement, right? We think the movement loses out on a lot of support, because people vote on the basis of economic situation, etc., and not based on their own record, instead of like basing their decision on who's feminist, who's more feminist, etc. Like, but you lose out on not only just the votes then, but you also lose out on very important donations that come from these feminists people, right? Because you're actively excluding these people now from through these political parties and by endorsing. And because the feminist movement has always historically been about including these women in the first place. But we also think this just reduces capacity, right? Because historically, like endorsing politicians, you can only once you endorse them, you can only like validate their actions, right? You can't actively criticize them. So you don't speak against them. You don't speak up against them in the first scenario. But even if you do, you seem like this hypocrite, right? Because people know that once you do this, you lose out on the legitimacy that is attached to feminist movement. Right? The problem with this is that feminist movement also has to voice out concerns on other important things, right? So like stuff like abuse, etc. So their voice is then discredited in all of these fields just because they're seen as unreliable and untrustworthy as well. So you also like invite hate from other actors within this as well. But then on how like you how you diversify to the point that it becomes really unsustainable, right? We think feminist movement at large has very limited funding, right? And it has very like limited social media like traction, etc. Right? because you need to spend, and within campaigns you have to spend money on like door-to-door campaigning, and all of this stuff is extremely expensive. So this inherently comes at a trade-off where you have to like, you know, spend money on protests, shelters, therapy, etc., which are for a lot more vulnerable women, etc. So you take away funding from all of this, and then you spend all of that money on to, like, you know, these campaigns in the first place. But we think this is then very unsustainable, right? Because you're impacting the most vulnerable person that you have to protect on their side of the house, right? And you actively take away from them to support these, like, you know, feminist parties in the first place. But the thing with feminist parties is, even within the status quo, we see a lot of females in politics, etc. So you actively also prioritize one female over the other, and for all of these reasons, proud to oppose.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition comes up here, and the gist of their case is, we also want feminist politicians. I have several problems with this strategically within this debate, according to how the motion's been phrased, right, and what this debate is actually supposed to be about. Number one, that is our side, because you're saying that you want the feminist movement to directly engage in politics. That is to say, the claim that you are a feminist must mean that you're part of a feminist movement. Because again, I'm not sure what it is that differentiates a woman from a feminist, particularly if these are all politicians that have feminist manifestos, that campaign on feminist promises, that call themselves and claim themselves to be feminists. At that point in time, they don't even have a case. But number two, even if this is your side and you want to have feminist politicians, guess what? We just do it better. We have more feminist politicians. We have a structured, perhaps, an electoral party that can exist. You perhaps galvanize more funds and channel them to the right people, etc. And I think when the feminist movement is actively involved, that is much better, because you can control where these things are going. That also looks like duplicitous politicians are held better to account when the feminist movement is actively trying to mobilize people. Because otherwise, women who don't know better might vote for someone who's just making populistic promises like Kamala Harris in the last election, right? But at that point in time, when the only thing that she promises is that she's going to overturn Roe v. Wade by doing nothing else in terms of actual budgetary allocations, how literally maternity leave and allocations by the federal government under the Biden-Harris administration were lower than the previous administration, which literally belonged to Republicans. At that point in time, we think that those people are much better off. But also, I think that this debate is about the feminist movement should engage directly, should they or should they not do this. This debate isn't the feminist movement should only do this till the day they die. This is the only thing that they can ever do. That's not what the burden on proposition is. The actual burden in this debate on opposition is that they have to prove why you exclusively should not do this, why the feminist movement should not participate in politics in this way. That is what the debate was actually about. I'm going to talk about 3 things in this speech. Number one, the purpose of the feminist movement, some argument that they tried to make, the alternative and why this is so necessary, why the alternative doesn't work on their side, and the varying success that you're able to get and the kinds of change that we produce. Let's talk about purpose, right? They say the purpose of the feminist movement is apolitical. This is a huge contradiction. They literally knifed this in the first opposition speech in 8 minutes time, so I'm not sure what would have happened across the rest of the bench. Because guess what? They're like, you should actually forego the institutions of politics, because political institutions have been harmful towards you. But their alternative is feminist politicians. So I'm not sure why at that point in time they can run this principle when they're actively knifing it in the same speech. Please come and clarify this, Faris, because I think you really need to. Let's talk about why this doesn't matter and why this principle is just a lie. The purpose of the feminist movement has never been to be apolitical, guys. We think the suffragettes and the suffragists, perhaps the most important and popular feminist movement in terms of how people identify with the feminist movement or how people see the feminist movement, were people who affected political change. They literally got to the right and the means to vote. Guess what we're championing? Electoral reform is important in terms of electoral engagement, right? This is the most important thing that you're able to get, because that is when you have a voice. That is when you can produce feminist candidates. That is when you get change, right? But we think this presumes that these people weren't feminists. The Aurat March or the Azadi March aren't political, etc. We think this is just an assertion. We think this is not true. In the same way that you got the right to vote through political means, we think in the neo-liberal capitalist system that we live in, equitable pay is as equal and right and is as important to your agency and autonomy. One thing that we're able to better secure on our side. I'll talk about lots of other things that we're able to do. Let's talk about the alternative, right? There are a couple of alternatives they give. Either you have big traditional parties, or that are, again, increasingly progressive and they're just great for women, etc. And this is an assertion, by the way. Or you have feminist politicians. I'll talk about both of these. Even though I've largely dealt with how feminist politicians is literally a squirrel within this debate. Big traditional parties, by the way, people like establishment Democrats that are apparently their alternative. These people that are always going to be progressive because there's a progressive context are the exact problem in this debate. We say that these people don't do do enough for you. They have failed you for far too long. We say it has been long enough. The Democrats under Biden literally became increasingly moderate to the point that they were literally labeled centrist, right? There was an entire parade round on this last year, guys. I'm not sure if you were at that tournament. The feminist vote, for example, for Keir Starmer's Labour Party, after it was polled, after he joined governance, literally said they were dissatisfied with the pro-woman policies of the Labour government because they don't really do anything for us, and that's something that we think is wrong. The reason this happens is because in the attempt to appease moderates, because you're no longer as popular, because there's a rise of the right wing in some places, and people are able to use populist rhetoric to convince people who perhaps fear for their security, people who have fears like immigration, etc. You are able to then, because you're no longer as popular, and there are razor-thin margins in these elections, you create an unsavory race to the bottom that affects and harms and marginalizes women, right? You're treated as a side issue and an afterthought. This is particularly because, guess what, guys? The Democrats have no incentive to exclusively appease you. Why? Because the language that you use on your side, when you say there shouldn't be an alternative, they know you're never going to vote Republican, right? That's the exact reason why you're not able to do things for these people, why they are never able, they have the insulation, but they don't need to make good change for these people, because they know that the alternative is so bad on the right that you're not going to move there, right? This is why you feel that you're not treated as importantly. There's literal paralysis and no reason to care about you. They increasingly do nothing for you. That is the world that they talk about. But we think progressives on their side, by the way, and they say you diversify to the point of uselessness. That is exactly what you're trying to do. Because how is the Democratic Party meant to appease to environmentalists, women, etc. as well, minority communities in terms of Asians, ethnic minorities, religious minorities as well, like Muslims within America? That is when you're increasingly diverse to the point where you cannot actually do anything for everyone, because again, if you are radical regarding feminism, you are stepping on someone else's toes, or perhaps stepping on the toes of moderates. That is why the incentives do not align with this. We told you this absence is paralyzing, horrific, and perpetuates the status quo in terms of all the things you don't have. Budgets for maternity leave, the gender pay gap, quotas and affirmative action, and abortion rights, etc. Right? At that point in time, we think that you're able to succeed with progressivism, because if they say there's a progressive context, the feminist movement, as even a single issue party like Reform UK in the United Kingdom, can be very successful, because there are lots of women. They're literally half of your population, and a lot of people perhaps believe in it. And again, if they feel this so disenfranchised, that means it's even more popular. It's structurally, if this is how they operate, there's no creation of urgency. They don't have radical speech, but our side does, right? You can capitalize and mobilize, etc., and capitulate people and galvanize, because the optics are different. The issue is much more critical and much more urgent on our side of the house. This means you are successful on varying levels. Mohsin already told you a lot about this, right? The only response was misogynists hate you more. We tell you, they hate you either ways, but the veil of protection they have, and the white elite can sit in the Senate, and you don't have an insider of the feminist movement present there to call him out, to hold him accountable. Manifestos, etc. don't need to exist, because again, we don't want these people to rule the government. We want them to be in seats. They can even join coalition parties. They can lobby other people. They even matter marginally, and that's a really good thing. There may be a parent team, maybe EOC can start one and win the state of California. That in terms of local governmental policy is so good. So that's varying success, and the fact that you are finding a political force means that if your funding matters, if your campaigning matters, if the media attention matters, then active parties, actual parties need to listen to you, cannot ignore you any longer. For all these reasons, clearly proposition takes this today.
Sultan had to do two things for the case to stand. Firstly, prove to you how this feminist movement has the capacity to be able to sit in the parliament. Because notice how all of their endpoints are policy making, we vote on policies, we do this, that. So he still hasn't proven the capacity of the feminist movement to be able to do so. Hoteja in her speech clearly prioritizes and explains to you how the feminist movement is at a trade-off. This is an opportunity cost. You have limited funding, limited media time, limited political and social capital as well. What do you do with it? Do you create shelters? Do you give women legal aid? Do you give women aid for therapy? Or do you go out and start campaigning? Do you start putting out advertisements for politicians as well? Notice how Sultan still hasn't done that. I'm not expecting the third to come up here and give such major clarifications. I think that's way too late. Secondly, they also have the burden to prove to you why just because the feminist movement is now creating a political party, just because the feminist movement is now endorsing a candidate, all of a sudden women will be like, aha, this is who we vote for. Because if it is true that people often vote on very arbitrary things, vote on very personal things, then I don't know why just because randomly the feminist movement, that sure, I might go to the feminist movement, I might go to the Orange March, but I would perhaps still vote for PMLN, even though they might have been sometimes misogynistic, because I think my economic interests are better there. Also, third, way too late. I don't think they can create such a major link at third as well. I think Sultan is supposed to do this. I want to do two other things as well. First thing, this is not just a two-party system. So if all of their endpoints are based on swing voters, then Sultan's entire speech cannot just be about if you don't vote for Democrats, you're going to have to vote for Republicans as well. But also, this other thing, and this is a weird thing they're running here. They think that the entirety of the feminist movement all of a sudden is going to make the entire political party. That's not true. It's only going to be the leadership of the feminist movement. That's what the motion also implies. Why should you believe my characterization over theirs then? Because this is just an assertion from their side. I think it is only the leadership of the feminist movement that is enough social capital, financial capital to be able to endorse a political candidate, or to make a political party, or to make a political wing as well. This means that the entirety of the feminist movement is not just going out and all of a sudden is going to make the political party to begin with. This is not a burden that they can put onto me. But secondly, even if it is, this is just insane, because the burden that the third above now has to defend is why I, as a woman, just because I go to the Aurat March, now have the responsibility to now join a political party and also endorse politicians as well. That's not the kind of burden you want to put onto people. So that is a very interesting question. What's so exclusive about the feminist movement that they're the only people that cannot do this? We tell you three things. Firstly, the fact that the feminist movement has always been a neutral, apolitical bystander. So even though the feminist movement criticizes the institution of marriage, it still knows that a lot of women still participate in the institution of marriage within Pakistan as well. The reason why it does that is because it wants women to be able to choose if they want to marry. They're not actively going to start coercing and actively going to start endorsing marriage, but they're like, this is what the cost-benefit analysis is. This is why marriage might be good for you, but these are the reasons why it's actively bad for you as well, and thus the choice is on you to marry or not. But the institution, we think, is still very oppressive. This is what we bring to you at first. We tell you that the feminist movement is, yes, going to criticize all politicians, is going to appreciate them when they actually do something good. This is the kind of fluidity you need. In their side, if you endorse the politician, the next minute when you criticize them, they did something sexist, you can't do anything because you're going to be called the hypocrite within society like you always have. You give more fuel to the fire, you prove the misogynists right, and you also make other women feel disillusioned because you tell them your voice has absolutely no legitimacy to begin with. Secondly, there's a lot of women that have always found the political system to be very oppressive against them. This social movement is perhaps the only safe haven for them where they don't have to actively engage in something that is political. I, as a woman, have always thought the political system was disillusioned. If now I find out that when I go to the Aurat March is also politicized, I think this is actively triggering and harming for me. Thirdly, because the Aurat March and the feminist movement perhaps is the only actor within society that can actively help you out with urgent, vulnerable matters as well. So legal aid, shelters, all of those things. This is the trade-off. They were supposed to defend this, and second, clearly the fact that Sultan still hasn't refuted our arguments means that he agrees. Then, first issue then, on better policy making. They say all of a sudden to get into the parliament, you're going to have votes, and all of a sudden you can use this leverage to pass a lot of policies as well. Let's go premise by premise. Firstly, do you even get to the parliament? We say that's not going to happen. Firstly, because it's very difficult to do so. Considering you have limited funding, limited media attention, and you're competing with so many other huge political parties, means that you're probably not going to get a lot of seats. You're probably not even going to get seats within the political system or parliament to begin with. Secondly, I think most people categorize their political lives and their social lives as well. They didn't want to build the link for you, I'll build it for you. I think I might be a part of the Aurat March, but I vote very differently because my vote is far more personal to me. Because those are other things that I also need to consider. Economics, whether this person is charismatic, whether this person can represent me on an international level. This means that just because you tell people to vote does not mean you'll actively get all of their votes either. Also note Khudaja's argument here. How if you tell people to endorse, for example, the PTI, all supporters that perhaps like PML more, like JUI more, all of those you lose out on those voters as well, because they think now the feminist movement has taken a side, they're not representing me properly. The problem with you taking a side is you lose out on all other supporters who perhaps like other political parties as well. Okay, secondly, the second premise about how the policies you end up making are far more representative. A lot of responses here. Firstly, I don't think so, because if it is true that the feminist movement is active in the leadership, is made up of very elitist women often, because these are are women that can perhaps not, they don't have to have a job, they can literally just like run the whole movement, they have enough money to do so, they don't have to care about their safety either because they already have insulation from all of that. The problem is then you have these elitist women representing you and making policies for even vulnerable women. What's the trade-off though? That you are going to coerce a vulnerable woman to vote for the feminist political party, but the policies they end up making for you are not tailored towards you because those elitist women don't understand what most women have to go through. What's the trade-off then? I think in our side, the fact that the feminist movement as a bystander can constantly criticize these political parties means you can push them to do even more. In their side, you get a compromised policy. In our side, because you have a fluidity, you can constantly criticize, sometimes appreciate, give them some validation, means that they're constantly pushed to do better as well. I think our alternative is better, because if they agree that the framing of this debate is people are becoming progressive, I think so are the vast majority of political parties. They generally care about women. Your policies are becoming far more feminist. Secondly, because your voter bank is still women, so a lot of political parties have to naturally turn feminist because they need to cater to those women. But thirdly, I think the pressure of the feminist movement constantly means that politicians don't want to be criticized, thus they end up making feminist policies as well. They want to get appreciation, thus they do good things as well. For the simple reason that third drop is way too late. We very simple links right now to a close.
One thing that infuriates me the most on these feminist motions is that people like in opposition always comes up and say that, oh, this thing already exists. There's nothing else you need to do, just strengthen it more. But secondly, I think then for them it's merely a buzzword you call out, it's just a symbol without any legitimate power. It's important that feminism without any actual legitimate power or any way that you can actually put or endorse things in a way that you could be benefited out of them, that means it just exists in absentia, it does not have any power at all. That's the word we oppose. But important pieces of clarifications first. I think their entire claim about feminist politicians already exist. Your ability to call out or criticize government already exists. Sure, even if I buy that, why can't I see structural change where feminist politicians are more empowered? Why can't I see that any marital rape constitution that was passed or bill that was proposed is still not actualizing or materializing in real world? I think it's important to note that your ability to criticize government is something that's not really very important over here until and unless you're part of the system or you're able to internally breach the system in its foundational structure. It is important for you to have that power where you can internally network in or connect in to the system where other people are making these decisions. But very, very important clarification over here. We are not saying make them the federal government. We are not saying make these feminist politicians maybe like the entire establishment, etc. We are just saying even some sort of soft power, some sort of hard power is very, very important, because we have reached enough time now that we are just protesting. We are chanting slogans, but it is not reflecting or it is not materializing in any way. We think enough is enough. You really, really need something more than just chanting slogans or protesting onto streets. I think what you need now is internal change, and the only way to do that is through politics. That is the part where politics really, really matter. Their entire soft job about politics is just something that's very, very oppressive and has been against women. That is why I say that politics is still very important to define where you are right now as a movement as well. The only way you can get somewhere is to deal with that system, get in where some around with it, especially with the voter base you have right now. If a feminist movement right now has a lot of following, that following will piggyback on you when you run for any election, you win in a party, you endorse some candidate, etc. Take that voter base, take that fan following of the feminist movement into those things. People are literally dying to support you there. The feminist followers, etc., they really, really want to support you on that. But two clashes within this debate. Firstly, where there is a need of urgency that exists, but secondly, onto the likelihood of your success. And first, then I'm going to talk about the need that exists in the first place. I'm going to characterize the entire thing that was brought up first and second. That is to say that right now in the status quo, in any part of the world that you go in, the kind of parties you see, for example, big dominant parties that have been conservative in nature for a long time, the kind of establishment they are backed by, etc., are the kind of people that scapegoat their responsibility. They give tokenistic or charity to women that we have done this for you, be happy with what we have done. That is the bare minimum that so far has been done for women's rights, etc. This is very important over here. I think they have failed you time and time again, and that is why it is very important that you come in a way, in the legitimate way or in the constitutional way that protects you against these parties. The point in time you in some way create a wing within existing party, or you endorse a certain candidate, etc. Now you have the kind of power to protect you against these big dominant structures in the system, etc. I think this is very important. But secondly, the most important need of this time right now is that no, you just can't chant slogans, you just can't protest now. What you really need is to let those emotions be materialized into something that is going to actually help you, i.e. propose bills, i.e. use your following of the feminist movement into other things that are going to stand behind you when you chant for something that is much more important within the political sphere of system where you kind of lobby people, where you kind of coerce other people or convince other people to fight for you, etc. That's the kind of thing we really want. Why we win this clash then? On legislative change first. They talked about marriage. I'm going to give you multiple examples where feminist people or politicians have tried so on and so forth about drafting this just about marital rape, just about things that structurally they wouldn't have gotten in protests and movements, etc. The reason this is very important is because these feminist people are much more progressive in nature. You need these people by now in order for the politics to actually be progressive as well. In order for politics to not be just weaponized but used in a more structured way for the benefits of women. But secondly, I think their entire idea about how feminism is very oppressive, you need to actually disassociate with them. Notice how contradictory it is in nature. Because first they just say that it's fine, we can just call the political parties out. They also said political parties already know their incentives to cater to you. They know what they're doing. I think that's very contradictory in nature. Because either you can choose that they are very oppressive, or either you can believe in them that they have the incentives to cater to you. I don't understand what you're picking. But this third idea about how feminism is a safe space. Then their entire idea about elite capture. I'm going to middle with both of them and tell you that then it's much more easier for elite captors to kind of like nitpick on these safe spaces more than the political systems, etc. Because these elite people have much more access within these safe spaces that already exist with the kind of power that they have rather than the political system. But secondly as well, I think we are fine either ways for these politics, etc. to remain on their side. Their entire idea that you cannot switch sides, etc. I think we are okay with it, because the point in time you're voting for a certain kind of party, you're endorsing a candidate, there's certain rationale behind it, you're fine with sticking with it. But secondly, if that party does something bad later on in the future, I think now that you're actively endorsing it, with the following that you have brought from the feminist movement, it is much more in your hands to hold them accountable because you're directly a part of it. But the second, on likelihood of your success on varying levels, there are three ways for how you achieve active change on our side in comparative to their counterfactual about spreading awareness and PS whatever that went on. Firstly, in terms of how you achieve change through internally, that just means you have direct engagement with people. In terms of capacity, that is to say, the following you have in feminist movement right now, they're much more than willing right now to support you when you want to legitimize that change in the way that you have legislative change, etc. In terms of maternity leaves, etc. In terms of abortion, etc. I think that is the way you have direct engagement with people that are endorsing, but also now you actively know what's going on, what are the kinds of decisions that are actively being made, etc. I think the likelihood of this success is much more on our side because you already have the capacity to do this. For those reasons, clearly, proposition.
When you have no real power and all you want is to have a little more soft power by strengthening the status quo, it comes at a major cost that they've not addressed so far, something that Arfa talks to you in a second about. Why so? Firstly, because it comes at a trade-off, something that we've been emphasizing constantly, of more urgent and vulnerable things that you can perhaps access. So they agree that the feminist movement has limited funding, it has limited resources. What does the feminist movement do? Directly help victims, perhaps, right? So donating to people who, I don't know, have been affected by acid victims, etc., right? Or people who've gone through a lot of abuse, etc., fighting legal cases for these people, etc. This comes at a direct cost of funding your political campaigns on your side of the house, donating to political campaigns, and if you want to take on the burden, which is something that they've largely tried to do, that we would create our own parties, this comes at an even bigger cost of doing all of these things. So for this potential change that you might achieve, because you are somehow also changing national policy at the end of the day by just having soft power, I think it's coming at the cost of all of these things that you can do at a much more micro level, but you're still able to materialize all of these things. Secondly, it harms your long-term ability to criticize political parties in the first place. So sure, in political systems like even America that you think is becoming very, very progressive, I think if you're supporting the Democratic Party as a whole because the representatives that you're supporting are also representing those parties at large, I think it comes at a direct cost of not being able to criticize these parties in the future. Look at what this looks like. I am told to vote for a particular political party right now because they're now feminist in nature, and there's a lot of rationale behind that particular decision as well. But now I'm going to go back on my word as the feminist movement's leader and be like, oh no, these people are not actually that nice, you should in fact go vote for another person. This creates a lot of confusion, and the sort of unity that currently exists within the feminist movement is something that is distorted to a very, very large extent. So you make anything and everything that you do in the future something that is highly ineffective on their side of the house. But two more reasons for why the dilution of the narrative that they're talking about as a whole, because they only want to have soft power, is problematic. Firstly, why will your policy ever be supported? Because the collective is being distorted to a very large extent, right? But secondly, how will you secondly, if political parties focus on far more important things like economic policy or foreign policy, etc., why will your particular movement's feminist ideas become the most important thing for that political party or that voter to vote on? These questions have not been answered by proposition, and they cannot win this debate on their side of the house. Let's talk about better policy making and where will there be a greater incentive to work on their side of the house. Number one, I think I don't get any incentive analysis from proposition for why these politicians are likely to work for feminist goals in the first place once you've endorsed them. Because note how easy it is to swing your narratives and be re-elected in the next election. If I'm voted by the feminist movement in the first place and I've been endorsed by them, it's very easy to pander to majoritarian narratives like, oh, better economic policy, lowering inflation, foreign policy, immigration, etc., to make sure that I'm re-elected in the future. So what you end up doing at their side of the house is waste feminist resources in order to ensure that you're endorsing a particular candidate who never ends up doing anything for you because there are no strings attached on their side of the house. On our side of the house, because there is constant criticism that you do as a collective by unifying the feminist movement and not losing out on support, is that you can hold these people accountable consistently in the short term and in the long term as well. But secondly, I think you cannot necessarily criticize tokenistic policies at the point at which you've already given support to that particular candidate. Because if they may end up making tokenistic policies like, oh, we're gonna put 2 more female representatives in a particular system, I don't think you're able to criticize them once you've put in your support behind them as well. But thirdly, to influence a politician and their policy, you need to be more important than every single other thing that people vote based off of. I don't get any analysis for why economic policy is not more important for voters or for politicians. Similarly with other things as well, I don't think insofar as you're not the most important thing, they're gonna even consider you when it comes to swing votes, etc., because there are more important things to focus on, right? But lastly, I think you also invite a lot of hatred and opposition. So it's not just that you're neglecting a lot of non-partisan support on their side of the house, because women who prioritize economic issues will now not vote for you because you're not focusing on those things primarily, and you're focusing on one particular political party that has a far different agenda on their side of the house. This is bad because you not only lose out on that support because now you've created opposition, but you also create a lot more hatred against yourself as well. So you lose out on any and all support, but also there is double jeopardy because people now hate on you because now you're in opposition for them. Because if you get into power because you've endorsed a political party, what you lose out on is what these people care about more. So if a woman cares more about her economic issues and you are supporting the party that is far more feminist, that is something that she loses out on, and therefore she does not support you on their side of the house. But secondly, on catharsis for women, and this is something that they have not necessarily addressed at all. Number one, I think what the feminist movement uniquely has had for the longest time is that it does not necessarily validate the oppression that women have historically gone through by colluding with the state. Because note what the perception looks like. If a woman goes from the feminist movement's platform, because general political candidates that are women are not necessarily from the feminist movement. AOC is not the feminist movement's representative in the parliament, right? what you end up creating on your side of the house is the feminist movement's candidate itself, which means that when she goes and sits in the parliament, she's the representative of the same state that has oppressed women historically, which is a very, very bad perception because it invalidates a lot of women and their experiences. But secondly, you lose out on the radical narrative that the feminist movement has always prioritized, right? Whereby they include every woman because of their radical narrative, whereby they do not succumb to the pressure of the state, whereby they say that we do not necessarily have to pander to the state itself to ensure that we bring about change, something that they've already done. From their progressive narrative, I think there's a lot of change that has already been brought forward on their side of the house. I'll take the point.
Feminist issues are proximate to women because the gender pay gap determines your rations, your children's school fee. Why would women not then vote for the feminist movement?
Women still vote based off of this policy because 50% of your vote still comes from women. Politicians like you yourself concede are making stuff like property laws, etc. because you understand that women's vote matters to you and you will make those particular things in the first place. So we can co-opt all of this by also making sure that the feminist movement remains unified on our side of the house and is not necessarily different. There are not different differences that are existing on their side of the house, right? But lastly and more importantly, let's weigh this debate up for you, right? On our side of the house, even if we're not able to materialize a lot more policy changes like they might end up doing by their swing votes and soft power that might exist in parliament, I think what we're uniquely able to do is to protect the same women collectively, because we understand that women can have political differences, but their shared experience of being a woman itself is something that we prioritize on our side of the house by ensuring that they're not neglected on any forum whatsoever, by making sure that they're not divisions between women based off of political differences, because we as a whole are a social movement that is criticizing politicians based off of the policies that they're making, but are not necessarily putting our support behind one politician at the cost of not criticizing another one. For all of those reasons, because we genuinely tell you why this matters for women themselves, we take this debate as LACAS.
I know I said third prop was way too late to answer the questions that I had asked, but like, come on guys, push the jawab de dete. I asked you guys where you get the capacity to be able to campaign so much, get into the parliament in the first place. Because clearly when you're making a political party to begin with, when you're even making a political name, there's a lot that goes into this. Fire spends a lot of time telling you what goes into this, I'll also tell you what does. Firstly, there's a lot of money you need to be able to run advertisements, to be able to hold rallies, to be able to rent out that place either. The fact that you have to constantly campaign. Secondly, you need a lot of social political capital as well, which often these social movements don't, because they've always been social movements, not political movements. Thirdly, you need a lot of these political connections as well. Notice how 3 speakers go by, I still don't know how they're accessing their endpoints. They just have endpoints, no mechanisms for those. The reason why this burden was very important is because your competitors will always have all 3 of these mechs. They will have political connections, they will have political capital, they will have money as well. They also have histories and so much experience within the political system as well. This means that your competitors will always win over you. You won't get into the parliament to begin with. This means all of their endpoints don't really stand. I also tell you in my speech why exclusively the feminist movement has a lot of other urgent matters to cater to. We had an entire argument on this. They literally just don't engage with it, and I'll tell you why this argument is more important than anything that they will tell you. Because I think when the feminist movement has historically used its limited funding, its limited media attention to talk about victims that are far more urgent matters. So a woman that needs shelter because she was just abused, a woman that needs money for therapy because she was sexually harassed perhaps, a woman that needs legal aid money because she needs to fight against her husband to get custody of her kids are very urgent matters that women are far more vulnerable for. This means that the kind of limited funding that the feminist movement often has need to go towards much more urgent and vulnerable matters for these women as well. So that might be clapping and telling you that these policies will come about in their side. How do they come about? I still don't know, because they have never mechanized this for me. But secondly, I tell you, even if those policies come about, those policies will always be tokenistic and superficial in nature. Because once you've endorsed a political candidate, this is a no strings attached movement, where the feminist movement can't go back on its word of saying, actually no, we're now not endorsing you, because people will think the feminist movement is stupid. If historically you've seen that people have always been so critical of the feminist movement, like Aurat March in Pakistan, the point at which the Aurat March goes back on its word, people are going to capitalize on this and say, aha, I told you guys, these people aren't putting as much rational as they would like you to believe. They got your vote and now they're telling you to not vote for this person again. They're going back on their endorsement. This is the kind of problem you've had. Because the feminist movement historically has been anti-state as well. Because the state has constantly been oppressive towards you when it legislates on your body, when it constantly cracks down on your protests as well. The fact that you actively participate in this system then means A, you legitimize that oppression, but B, you lose out on the only mechanism that you've always had to be able to criticize political parties. We told you this was a very unique mechanism that the social movements needs to continue having, but they never tell you how they're going to have that. How do we bring change then? Firstly, and this is where I'm going to use their own framing. They say Zoran Mamdani is here, guys. I think he's becoming more progressive. Yes, they are. People are now caring about feminist issues as well because they understand these are urgent matters. The fact that the feminist movement can even spread awareness or criticism also means that people are going, this trajectory is going upwards, where people are far more concerned about feminist issues as well, even like political parties that aren't built around feminism. Secondly, a lot of your voter banks, and by the way, thank you for that beautiful POI. If your political parties know a lot of your voter bank has like proximate issues like gender wage gap, and if they want to get that vote, then they will probably work on gender wage gap because they know they want this voter bank to begin with. Thirdly, we also tell you that feminist politicians can still exist. Sultan's response to this was absurd. Feminist politicians can't exist because the motion doesn't give you the fear to assume that. No guys, you don't necessarily have to be a part of the feminist movement's leadership to be a politician. Women who are like generally, I also would become a feminist politician, not just because I'm part of the feminist movement to begin with. This is very important because women will still get representation in our side of the house. We will still have feminist politicians in our side of the house. The fact that they never give you the mechanisms as to how they're achieving their endpoints means that they can clearly not win this debate. And simply because they haven't engaged with all of our arguments either also means that they can't clearly win this debate. You might endorse PTI, but if I'm a PMLN voter, I will never support the feminist movement and I will leave ostracized and invalidated. That's what I would propose.
The reason why opposition has badly lost this debate is that they only have one strategic challenge for us, and it makes them lose. They say there is no capacity. But guess what their alternative is? They say there's not enough money, there aren't enough people supporting this. And the elite capture happens because the elites that are the leaders of the feminist movement don't give a rat's, about the average individual or the middle class or the lower class. But their alternative are soup kitchens, the statewide welfare scheme that is going to exist and how everyone is going to be benefited by this, right? I think if that is the case, and these leaders are elite and only care about their elite interests, these are the same people and the only people with the capital to sustain these things and operate at a loss. If these are the incentives of these people, I'm not sure why elite capture reliance on elites is greater on their side, because their only alternative is let's throw money at people, right? I think even if this is the opportunity cost of volunteer work for the vulnerable and the harmed, I think the fact that you're able to get more stuff on our side in terms of budgets, in terms of perhaps with the results of maternity leave making people more fiscally autonomous, because again, a poor and vulnerable individual can't go on unpaid leave until they have maternity leave. These are the kinds of vulnerable people from the lower class they're talking about. Because guess what, guys? What are those budgets going to be used for? If you become the senator of your state or you become the local governor, what are you going to give the allocation towards? There is often the government that does all of the things that they're talking about in terms of creating soup kitchens, in terms of making welfare schemes, etc. Right? I think at that point in time, if you are able to get more socioeconomic capital, if you're able to get more political power, and you're able to access public funds critically on our side, which aren't hinged on these elite interests that they're talking about, they are so bad. That is why we're able to take them on their basic best case as well. The second strategic reason they lose, however, is that they drop feminist politicians when they realize that that is a knife to their own case, and they start saying endorsements are really bad, especially a third op. This is literally your case, guys, because we're talking about engaging directly within politics, i.e. our mechanisms were setting up politicians, setting up candidates, setting up parties. What we literally told you, this was my speech. Big parties backstab you, big parties don't do enough for you. That is the electoral system. So guess what Faris really does in his speech? He just concedes all the harms of the political system and says that it's really bad. Because the premise of all the argumentation, and this is very important panel, is that the state just doesn't matter. The political system is so bad. So even if there's a likelihood of success, we think that likelihood is good. Why? Because do they want people to stop paying taxes? Do they want that government to disappear? Is this government not powerful and responsible for the laws that are going to protect you? Are they not responsible for the welfare that you're going to get, the kinds of policies that are going to economically empower you or disenfranchise you? That is why the government does matter. I'm not sure why this case is debate winning at that point in time. We told you that feminists, we told you that you are still able to get votes on our side, and they literally concede this. Because they say, oh, the proximate issues are the reason why women are going to vote for the big parties. This means if the issues are indeed proximate, 50% of the population is women. Guess what you need to get political power? It is not just money, it is literally votes, guys. We told you, if this is the criteria of getting into political power. You are able to fight the elites, fight the system through these means, etc. And again, you can't go right. That's why the big parties compete with marginal offers, extend to small things or olive branches that doesn't actually work, and this takes down their characterization when they also concede to this and say this is untrue. They have an exclusive responsibility in terms of apoliticalness. This is something that they contradict themselves. But let's talk about safe spaces, right? We tell you that the safe spaces are worse because they are a bubble. Elite capture is a lot more likely because if there's a liberal space, you don't have to work to extend that because you're already in a liberal space. If for God's sake someone is born in a more conservative society, that person is screwed over. You don't have an incentive to work for them. But legislation is indiscriminate. It affects all people. Even if the rich lady gets something good for herself in terms of equitable pay, that's going to affect everyone. It's long-term lasting and indiscriminate. We told you on vulnerable individuals, you are likely to get better outcomes for them as well, right? At that point in time, how do we get change and how do we deal with conservative societies? We told you that in terms of conservative societies, it is exactly where legislation is important. If the context and the best example is that marriages are very, very pernicious in Pakistan, the only reason why you can go to a thana and get your justice is because marital rape legislation exists. Otherwise, the thanedaar can just say this is completely fine. There is particularly in conservative societies where mindsets aren't going to change, and the state needs to protect you, that law protects you, and you have changed because you have seats, you have coalitions, you are being able to be appeased by political parties because you are finally a political force. For all these reasons, because we are better for women, we are better for the feminist movement, clearly proposition takes the debate.
Thank you guys. So the debate decision will be in the hall.